And now I'd like to call on our keynote speaker, Douglas Gambo.
Magandang umaga. Good morning. Thank you for coming to Bataan Park today to remember and honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice for us 70 years ago. Before we begin our main message, may I share with you a brief discussion I had with two amateur war historians. They were discussing which warriors in history were the most reckless and most daring of all. One said that at West Point, they taught that the Turks were overall the most reckless and daring. The other man said General Wainwright claimed that in the Philippines, the Philippine Negritos were the most reckless and daring of all. They asked me what I thought. I said that the most reckless and most daring that I ever saw were the Manila jeepney drivers. Those of you who are laughing have been there. To understand the scope of the Bataan Death March, the 9/11 Twin Towers death toll was 2,752. The Pearl Harbor death toll was 2,402. 4 times as many died on the Bataan Death March as either Pearl Harbor or Twin Towers. We don't forget Pearl Harbor, we don't forget 9/11, and we should never forget the Bataan Death March. That is why we meet here today. The story of the Bataan Death March takes place during World War II. At that time, Hitler considered the Aryans to be the superior race. Hitler believed that the superior race should take over and rule the inferior races, so he began his blitzkrieg invading of the countries of Europe. In his conquest, he believed that Jews were the most inferior of the inferior peoples, so he exterminated 6 million of them. In the Pacific, Tojo considered the Japanese the master race. All other Asians were considered inferior peoples. Tojo began a conquest of Southeastern Asian peoples. Americans and Filipinos had a different worldview. Both nations valued liberty and freedom and the sanctity of life. In the classrooms, both nations taught the Declaration of Independence, which reads, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." On December 7th, 1941, Japan attacked American bases on Pearl Harbor, Guam, and Wake Island. The same day, different date because of the international dateline, the Japanese attacked the Commonwealth of the Philippines. The Imperial Japanese General Hama expected the Philippines to fall in 30 days, but at the worst, 50 days. General MacArthur planned a defense of the Philippines based upon 5 holding lines. Hold each line for as long as practical, then as a delay in action, when they're ready to attack, fall back. He wanted to fall back and protect Manila. This delaying action plan was designed to allow time for support to arrive from Pearl Harbor. Of course, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, that plan had to be abandoned, and they went back to Plan Orange, which, by the way, was taught at the Academy since 1927. A main Japanese invasion force landed at Lingayen Gulf and proceeded toward Bataan. The Japanese carried out an aggressive offensive, but fierce defense stalled the attack along the lines. In the field, fighting day and night since December 8th, were Filipino Brigadier Generals Vicente Lim, Mateo Capinpin, and Fidel Segundo. Filipino and American troops made the Japanese pay heavily for every inch of ground gained. MacArthur set a trap and surprised the Japanese with a brilliant end around. The Japanese casualties were shocking. General Hama ordered a withdrawal from the 14th Army's forward positions on 8 February. The Japanese army had suffered 7,000 killed and 11,000 wounded. The unexpected tenacity of the defenders forced Hama to call in for reinforcements. For the Americans, the failure of supposedly an invincible Japanese to be able to crack their defenses lifted their morale. By the way, even though this was a terrible time, the Americans and Filipinos still had a sense of humor. Despite the seriousness of the situation, they liked to have a little fun. Many times when they shot in the trees at what they thought were snipers, it was monkeys. So they said, listen, we can't waste bullets on the monkeys, so from now on, don't shoot at anything in the trees unless it's wearing glasses. The papers back home called MacArthur the Lion of Luzon for what they had done at Bataan. If you understand, the Japanese had swept right through Southeast Asia, took Singapore very quickly, but not at Bataan. So they called MacArthur the Lion of Luzon. He became an American hero. The press went crazy over what they were doing in Bataan. Many war babies were named Douglas. I was one of them. Twice MacArthur was asked to leave the Philippines by his superiors. If you knew MacArthur, he said, I'm staying and fighting. In March, MacArthur formally ordered by the president to leave the Philippines and go to Australia. Upon arriving in Australia, he sent back this message, the famous reply, I shall return. General Jonathan M. Wainwright II took command of the Allied forces in the Philippines. The bloodiest fighting occurred at the Porac-Guagua line, where Brigadier General Sulek, Brower, and Kakimping held the line against massive aerial and artillery bombardment, strong tank assaults, and infantry banzai attacks by the Takahashi and Tanaka detachments. The reinforcements the Allies had expected and the supply support needed never materialized. These men were left there in those jungles without adequate support whatsoever. Clothing, barbed wire, gasoline, sandbags, medicine, everything was in short supply. The scarcest commodity of all was food. From January 6th on, those on Bataan lived on half rations. In our modern language, for weeks, they lived on 1,000 to 2,000 calories per day. By the end of February at Bataan, malaria, beriberi, scurvy, and dysentery had reached epidemic proportions. They had every reason to quit. But as hungry and sick as they were, they fought on. The freedom fighters of Bataan were pilots without planes, cavalrymen without horses, gunners without tanks, and infantrymen without shoes. All fought doggedly against the relentless tide of Japanese invaders and their unending artillery bombardment. The Filipino and American freedom fighters fought side by side in a life or death battle together. They coined a new word, Phil-American. Phil-American, or for short, Phil-Am. Phil-Am troops with Phil-Am spirit displayed Phil-Am stamina and grit. A Phil-Am partnership of brotherly love and respect. They fought on. With the common belief that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. On March 21st, the Japanese sent General Wainwright a message saying, if he would surrender, quote, international law would be strictly adhered to by the Imperial Japanese forces, unquote. The Phil-Am warriors ignored the offer to surrender. They fought on. The last man out of Bataan before its fall was Lieutenant Colonel Carlos P. Romulo. Romulo left this brief message: remember freedom. Starving, racked with diseases, no medicine, exhausted from lack of sleep, being bombed from the air up to 70 bombings per day. No reinforcements are coming, with only 20% of the men still able to fight at all. General King made this decision to surrender to save what life he could. He did not surrender all forces. 9,000 went to Farragut Island, and of course those in the southern islands continued to fight. At Bataan, 75,000 became prisoners of war. About 12,000 Americans and 63,000 Filipinos. To announce the surrender, this Voice of Freedom radio broadcast was sent from Malinta Tunnel, Farragut Island, April 9th, 1942, and I quote, "Bataan has fallen. The world will long remember the epic struggle that Filipino and American soldiers put up in the jungle and along the rugged coast of Bataan. They have stood. The intrepid fighters have done all that human endurance could bear. Bataan has fallen. But the spirit that made it stand, a beacon to all liberty-loving peoples of the world, cannot fall." After their surrender, thousands of prisoners were herded together on Bataan. Each was searched to see what they had on them. If they had any food or water or medicine, it was taken away. And if anyone was found with Japanese money, they were beheaded. On April 10th, 1942, the March of Death began. It was a very hot day. A seemingly endless line of sick and starving men began their 60-mile trip to Camp O'Donnell in central Luzon. Along the way, if the POWs fell, they were shot to death. To save bullets, later they were bayoneted. Bodies of dying men were laying all along the road. Anyone trying to assist them was subject to death. Many, many bodies were run over by the vehicles. April 12th was a day the marchers who lived will never, ever forget. They were forced to sit the entire day in the sun with no covering whatsoever and no water in scorching heat. Many, many died. Some went insane. Filipino civilians who tried to help by throwing food or offering water were mercilessly beaten. The word passed that if a marcher fell and did not get up, they'd be killed. Some Filipinos hid along the march route, and if they saw a marcher fall, they would try to drag them in and protect them. Many paid the price for that loving assistance. Soldiers who before Bataan had weighed 200 pounds or more, at the end of the 6-day march weighed less than 100 pounds. At the end of the march, they were held at Camp O'Donnell. After 8 months in Camp O'Donnell, 27,000 died. That's 10 times more than at the Twin Towers. After the surrender of Bataan, some soldiers escaped and continued to fight as guerrilla warriors. Lieutenant Ramsey was among the escapees. He was told that a submarine was coming to get him and some other men. He declined and chose to stay and fight with his Filipino friends. Lieutenant Ramsey was quoted as saying, quote, "I was fighting out of loyalty and love. I had learned from the Filipino people a love for country. Perhaps not my own country, but a country that I had adopted. And for me, it was almost my own." And by the way, I share Lieutenant Ramsey's sentiments. From various jungle mountain hideouts, Ramsey sent critical intelligence information to General Douglas MacArthur in preparation for the liberation of the Philippines. The Japanese offered a $200,000 reward for any Filipino who would bring in Ramsey. Not one Filipino betrayed him. During World War II, over 200,000 Filipinos fought in defense of the United States. One half of those, 100,000 Filipinos, died in the war. As a Commonwealth of the United States before and during the war, Filipinos were legally American nationals. Filipinos were promised all the benefits afforded to those serving in the armed forces of the United States. After the war, in 1946, Congress passed the Rescission Act, which stripped Filipinos of the veteran benefits that they had been promised. That was a bad call. It's worth reversing. There should never be a second-class veteran, and America should never be a second-class keeper of promises to veterans. The 1 to 2 month conquest of the Philippines, their words got applause. The 1 to 2 month conquest of the Philippines, predicted by the Japanese High Command, lasted 6 months. The valiant Phil Am stand bought enough time to save Australia and New Zealand. Because of the stand at Bataan, we were able to regroup in the southern part of Asia and mount an attack back to defeat the Japanese. Without that stand, we would not have Australia and possibly would have lost the war. Those at Bataan made the ultimate sacrifice for us, so America remains free with the God-endowed rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Bataan, in simplest terms, was the fulfillment of this. Greater love has no man than to lay down his life for his friends. Never forget what our friends did for us at Bataan. To those active duty and retired military in our midst, thank you for your service. To Mayor Lent, thank you for faithfully continuing your support of this annual ceremony. To Mr. Lozano, Captain Larabee, Mr. Medley, Mrs. Dombrowski, Commander Viaduct, Pastor Hall, and others who labor to make this memorial happen, thank you for your hard work and dedication to the cause. In conclusion, thank you one and all for coming here today to remember those who died to protect our rights, and may each of us draw closer to the one who gave us those rights. Maraming salamat po.
And now we have a call on Commander Manuel Viaduct and Pastor Butch Hall for Story to Philippines.
Again, thank you for allowing me to be here. Chaplain Viaduct sends his regrets. He is with his mother, who is ailing, and he is preparing to go back to the Philippines with her. So you might keep them in your prayers. I know they would appreciate that. Chaplain Viaduct came to me a few weeks ago, or a few months ago actually, and he asked me if I would be willing to go to the Philippines, knowing that I had made 19 previous trips to the Philippines as a medical missionary. And I told him that I would be more than glad to return to my second home, because that's what the Philippines has become to me, is a second home. So I was fortunate enough to have the support and the friendship of a group of people who traveled back to the Philippines with me. In fact, 2 of them are here right now. Would you stand up for just a second, please? Let us just give you a hand and thank you for your service. with me back to the Philippines. And Chaplain Beardog asked me if I would tell my connection to the Philippines. Well, I would like to share that with you. My brother Marlon was a POW at Bataan. After the march, he was taken by ship and sent to Japan to work in the coal mines. At the end of the war, he returned home. This man, who was over 200 pounds, who was 6 foot tall, came home to America weighing about 87 pounds. He was placed in a hospital where he stayed for about 3 years in a veterans hospital as he tried to gain strength and health. In the meantime, my father had passed away, and my mother was left with 13 children. The government came in and took over our home because we had no way of paying for it, so we were moved out. We literally lived on the banks of the Brazos River in Waco, Texas. And I'm going to tell you that it was a miserable way to live. When it rained, we got wet. When it was cold, we got colder. Because we had no tent, no shack, no house. We literally lived on the banks of the river. And my brother, when he was released from the hospital, he came looking for us. And by that time, my older siblings had all run away. And it was just my younger brother, myself, and my mother living on the river. Marlon came and he found us. And he took us to his home. He taught us what it was to love. To love as a family. You see, we didn't love as a family. Now, if you said something against my brothers or my sister or my mother, I would fight you in a heartbeat. But that wasn't love. I don't know what it was, but it was maybe pride of family. But Marlon came back from the Philippines with a love for family that he had learned in the Philippines. And he brought us together. He taught us how to love. And then as we lived with him, he shared his experiences, but in a kind way. He never spoke bad about the Death March. He never spoke bad about the Japanese. But whenever he spoke of the Filipinos, there was a special love connection. He would tell how Filipinos would, on the march, would sneak and give him food. Many times just grains of uncooked rice. But when you're starving to death, that's a lot. And he carried that love into our family and brought us together as a family. When I got older, I wanted to share that love. And I wanted to share it with the Filipino people. So I went on my first mission trip. And I was surprised when I got to the Philippines how many American citizens I found living there. And I asked over and over why. And they simply said, because of the love that we found by the people here. And that is a great legacy.
Yes.
And I can thank you from the bottom of my heart. I don't want to get any more in depth because I don't want to cry in front of you. And I would, believe me. But I can simply tell you this, that my love for the Philippines will keep me going to the Philippines. When I go there, it's like going home. To me, it's not much different than when I go back to Texas, I go home. When I go to the Philippines, I go home. When I come here, I come home. So I thank you. And I want to thank the Filipino people on behalf of my family.
And now the Bangor Security Force Marines will do the 21 gun salute.
No, they didn't get the word on that.
You did? Oh. Now we'll just go on the next one. We're gonna do the retired colors and taps by Captain Kent Larabee. Here.